But I'm grateful for Matt handling last week's passage. It's a great passage where now Jesus comes on the scene and he experiences his friends Mary and Martha. Or actually, they send him word, and then this week he's going to experience his friends Mary and Martha. But I'm grateful for that. And if you're a guest here with us, we walk through the Bible verse by verse is what we do. And so we're going to be in the Gospel of John. We're going to be walking through the rest of John chapter 11. So if you have your Bibles, open up to John chapter 11. While you do that, I want to review a little bit, but Matt walked through the passage where Jesus reveals himself as the resurrection and the life. And he makes this beautiful promise. He says, "You will die." It gets better, I promise. "But you will live." You will die, but you will live. And today we're going to pick up right where that left off. Before we get there, I want to walk you through a little bit of our plan for Christmas because we're decorated for Christmas. I want to thank the Connect groups that came in and decorated our church for Christmas. They did a fantastic job. Yeah, you can clap for them. If I did it, there would just be trees. I don't know, probably lights. Definitely not different size ornaments on a tree. I never would have conceived of that. But they did a great job. I'm grateful for the gifts that each one of you have that are different from other people. It's why God makes us a church, so that we can edify each other using the gifts that he's given us. Grateful for that. So we are going to have two more messages. We're going to stay in series this week and next week. And then after that, we're going to start a three-week like mini-series called Christmas Through the Eyes Of, where we're going to look at Christmas, the birth narrative of Christ, through different perspectives throughout the Bible. So I'm excited about that. We have 3 baptisms already scheduled between now and the end of the year. If you're interested in being baptized, you can take out the Connect card in the seat behind you and just check the box that says baptism, fill out your name and info, and we'll get in contact with you this week, and we'll get it all set up and make sure everything's ready to go. But we have 3 already scheduled, and maybe more if the Lord decides to move in that way. Advent starts today. Thank you to the Dunnigans for doing our Advent reading. And we want to remind you that we have an Advent devotional that we're trying to do as the whole church. And so Matt's going to talk about it at the end of the service. But if you are interested, the Jesse Tree, which is for sale out in the lobby, was written by Chip and Sonia Dodd. And it's a fantastic resource for you and your family. We got some videos that we've done that are going to go along with that. And if you don't want to purchase it, it is free on Chip's website. So you can do it that way as well. But I want to, as we dive into our message, I want to acknowledge the fact that Christmas typically is a time for joy and hope, right? I mean, those words are synonymous with the Christmas season. Joy to the world, right? I mean, we walk through those. But I want to offer up maybe a different perspective, because I want to offer a different word that I think goes along with Christmas, and that word is pain. Now, when we focus on joy and hope, a lot of times we do so to the neglect of realizing that this season is a season full of pain for a lot of people. And so I'm grateful for the message this morning, because I think it's going to set the pace for Christmas this year, for our church. To remember that although Christmas is a time for joy and hope, it's also not absent of pain. We're going to get into John chapter 11. As we do, I want to tell you maybe more, a little TMI about myself. I often will share and overshare, but my wife's not here today, so I can say whatever I want. I have this superpower. I don't know if you like superhero movies or whatever. I have this superpower. I know you're on the edge of your seat for me to reveal what my superpower is. It's the ability to tune out my wife. So about half of the room probably resonates with that superpower. But I could sit on the couch and I could have a video game, like playing a video game. I don't do it that much anymore. I've grown up a little bit. But when the Dodgers are in the playoffs, my friend over there, I appreciate you wearing your jersey. When the Dodgers are in the playoffs, my wife can have a full-on conversation with me, and I don't hear a word. Like, I'm telling you, this is full confession time. And I'm only doing it because I know this is a safe space with other people who probably do this as well. But like, my superpower is not that I can tune out my wife. It's that I can tune out my wife and make her think that I'm listening. Like, there's just something amazing about that. So we get to the end of the conversation. She's like, did you hear a word that I said? I'm like, no. The Dodgers are, like, literally Shohei Ohtani is up. Do you think I was... And I need help. I need to not do that. But my guess is, and the reason why I out myself like that is because I'm guessing a lot of you in here relate to it. I promise you some of the men in here relate to that. But if we really peel back to the layers of the onion, I'm guessing all of us relate to this superpower that I have, especially during this season. Because what we do is it may not be the Dodgers winning the World Series like it was in October, but it is Christmas parties. Not just one. Some of you are like, I got 10 parties and like 7 days to get through them all. Maybe it's presents. We start shopping on Black Friday, which sometimes I accidentally call Good Friday, which is wrong. It's getting that ugly Christmas sweater. The potluck stuff you've got to cook, and all of the Christmas songs that are not about Jesus. And we fix our eyes on these things. We have the ability not to tune out our spouse, but to tune out our God. See, during this season, we have the ability to focus on all the things that the world tells us to focus on. Our idols show up in this season. But God's going like, hello, I'm here. And so I'm grateful for this message because we have a tendency to tune out our God. We get so focused on what's going on, and in this passage, we're going to see why that's detrimental to our lives. Jesus is going to show us why it's harmful for our lives to tune out God in the midst of whatever's going on in our life. And I think he's going to offer us a better way. So let's take a look. If you have your Bibles, open up to John chapter 11, starting in verse 28. I'm going to show you, we're going to pick up where Matt left off. It's going to be in this region down here. This is really like central Israel. There's a lot down here. It's all desert and camels. But Jerusalem is right here. And what's amazing about this is we're in John chapter 11. There's 21 chapters in the book of John. The next 10 chapters are going to focus on a very small portion of time right here. Like, we've been through 11 chapters, and the next 10 chapters are all just narrowing in on the movement of Jesus towards the cross. It's like John wants us to focus on something. It's amazing. So our passage today, the story that takes place, Lazarus being raised from the dead, it takes place right here, just to the east of Jerusalem. Now, in between Bethany and Jerusalem is the Garden of Gethsemane, which is kind of right here. And that's where, obviously, Jesus is going to take his disciples before he gets arrested. And so this is the area that we find ourselves in, Bethany, just on the other side of the Kidron Valley from Jerusalem. So from the Garden of Gethsemane, you can see the walls of Jerusalem, and just on the other side of the hill is now where our story takes place. It says, when she had said this, well, what did she say? Jesus reveals himself to be the resurrection and the life in the passage that Matt talked about last week. And he leaves her with a question, the most important question that we will ever answer. Do you believe this? Jesus says, I'm the resurrection and the life. You're going to die, but you're going to live. And he says, do you believe this? And she responds and says, I believe. Essentially, I believe. You are the Son of the living God. And so when she had said this, when she had confessed her belief, Martha went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." So she gathers herself and has this conversation with Jesus. And then she goes and tells her sister Mary that Jesus is here. But it's not like, "Hey, Mary, Jesus is here. You should go see him." No, it's more like this. "Hey, Mary, Jesus is here. If you hurry, you can go see him." She doesn't want anyone else to know. She has no desire for this to be a spectacle. She just wants Mary to encounter Jesus. Then verse 29 says, "And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him." I want you to get an idea of what's going on here. So Martha is with Mary, and she hears that Jesus is coming to her. And in true Martha form, right? Remember Luke chapter 10 where she's like the busy bee. She's doing all this stuff and she's trying to cook and clean and prepare the house. And Mary's doing what? She's sitting at the feet of Jesus. And so Martha, she can't get away from being Martha. It's just who she is. She hears Jesus is coming and she doesn't wait on the timing of Christ, right? She picks up her stuff and she rushes now outside the village. And she meets Jesus on the outskirts of the village. So Jesus hadn't, the thing I love is she doesn't invite Jesus to come to Mary. She's like, "Wait here, Jesus. Like, just wait here. I'm going to go get my sister, and I'm going to bring her to you." Like, she's the one doing everything. And you see the true personality of Martha on display, which I hate because I'm 100% a Martha and not a Mary. I wish I'm working towards getting to be a Mary, but I'm 100% a Martha. But so Jesus is outside the village where Martha met him, and Mary now comes and meets him there. When the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. So Martha wanted Mary to have this private, intimate moment with Jesus, and she whispers, but then when Mary gets up, these mourners, now the mourners, I think Matt talked about this last week, but the mourners were either, if you didn't have family around, you would hire public mourners that would come and they would be in your house and they would mourn publicly for you. In other words, they would express the grief of the family. And they were required to stay there for 7 days. If you had family, they could fulfill that role. They still were required to stay with you 7 days. And anytime you were mourning, they had to mourn with you. So they thought that she was going to the tomb of Lazarus to weep there. And so they follow her now, weeping and wailing and screaming. And so what Martha had wanted, which was for it to be just an intimate encounter with Jesus, now became a spectacle where they're weeping and they're screaming and they're walking all around. And now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Now, we see the feet of Jesus is the place where Mary likes to be the most. It's a really an intimate picture as she walks up to him in all of her sorrow and grief, in all of her sadness, and she just falls at the feet of Jesus. Now, sitting at someone's feet is a sign of submission. So she comes up, and she's going to put her faith on display in the midst of her grief. So she comes to Jesus and she falls at his feet. And then you're going to see her humanity just kind of swirling around inside of her. Two different acts that are going to put on display, I think, two different things. First, she falls at her feet, which is a humbling submission. But then she says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And in that statement, I think there's two contrary statements at play. So one, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. In other words, you're the Messiah. You're the God of the universe. I have faith that you are who you say you are. But also, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. In other words, I think there was a better way this could have played out. And so we see her humanity just swirling, and I think we can relate with that, right? There's this tension of both faith and doubt at the same time. This tension of the fact that she knows God is who he is. She knows that Jesus is the Lord of her life, and yet there's this fleshly desire for her to be the determining factor of what happens in her life. And I think we all wrestle with that. We wrestle with the same thing, right? The idea that we know that Jesus is God, and yet at the same time, when we go through pain and suffering, we want there to be a different way. Like, God, if you had just been here, then I would have gotten a better job. If you had just been here, then I would have not lost my brother, or if you had just been here, my spouse wouldn't have left me. If we put these conditions, we know Jesus is God, but we question whether his way is actually higher than our way. And I think that's what the picture of what we have with Mary now at the feet of Jesus, and in the same way, Martha in last week's passage, both confessing that they know Jesus is Lord, but if he had just done it differently, then they wouldn't find themselves dealing with the tragedy that they now are dealing with. There was a way in their mind for God to prevent them from feeling the feelings that they have to deal with now with their brother in the tomb. And I think we can resonate with this, because I think sometimes we think God's job is to prevent us from going through tragedy. Like if God is real, then we won't deal with the tragedies of life. But that's not God's job. See, everything comes back to Genesis chapter 1 through 3. Everything. And now we see the tension of both faith and doubt at the same time. Now, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. So here's the thing. It wasn't just a sadness or a sorrow. The word for deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled is a word that really is best translated. Jesus was indignant. He was angry. See, Jesus was angry because the misery that death inflicts should not have happened in the first place. He's standing in front of a Mary who's weeping. He's standing in front of a Mary who's grieving. He's feeling her pain, and he's angry. Because Genesis 3 should have never happened. It wasn't the plan. God never created us wanting us to rebel against him. And then sin ushers into the world. With it, death, sickness, murder, abuse. Everything wrong with this world dates back to Genesis chapter 3. And so many people ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Why is there so much tragedy in the world? And the answer is simple. It's much simpler than we want to make it. Is that when we rebelled against God in Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve chose their fleshly desires over the will of God and ushered sin into the world, everything about this world was touched by death. That's why children die too young. That's why people are taken advantage of. That's why we die in the first place. It all goes back to Genesis chapter 3. But as Jesus looks at the thing that causes Lazarus to be in the tomb. Not that he died, but that sin came into the world. He's angered and troubled. And now he speaks, and he says, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus wept. Now, we make light of this verse like, it's the shortest verse in the Bible. But John didn't write in verses. This is just the way it was broken up by human authors later down the road. But I think there's just such a profound message in the fact that Jesus wept. We're going to deal with a lot of that on the back end of my message. But I think right now what you need to know is he took in and surveyed the scene. He encountered both of his friends, Mary and Martha. He saw that his friend was in the tomb. He saw all of the pain and all of the agony and all of the suffering that surrounded the tragedy of Lazarus dying. And his response, even though he knew the answer in the back of the book, was to weep for the tragedy and the grief and the horror that Mary and Martha were experiencing. We have to ask the question, why? Why did Jesus, who knew the answer in the back of the book, why did he find it appropriate to weep if he knows how the story ends? And we've kind of already answered it, but first he weeps because sin was never the plan in the first place. But I think he weeps because he loves Mary and Martha, and he loved Lazarus, and he's experiencing the emotions that go through the loss that Mary and Martha are feeling. And so we have in verse 35, Jesus weeps. And so the Jews look at him and rightly discern that he loved Lazarus. See how he loved him. And Jesus' response was to weep. But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" They also wrongly assumed that that was Jesus' mission. That he came to prevent death and to prevent all of the tragedy and all of the agony that we experience in this world. But that is not why Jesus came. And if you expect Jesus to be the preventer of your pain, you are mistaken. He will not prevent your pain, but he will give purpose in the midst of your pain. And so they, like many of us, they look at Jesus and go, "Man, can't he take away all of our pain? Can't he do what we need him to do so that we can avoid feeling the things that we don't want to feel?" Then Jesus, deeply moved again, a second time that he finds himself deeply moved, he came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone lay against it. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures. I want you to kind of picture the scene of what this could have looked like. This is the garden tomb. This is one of two sites, the other being the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, one of two sites that they think were the resting place of Jesus prior to the resurrection. Now, my hope is that this is the place, because the other one is like the Orthodox and Catholic Church has taken it and they've like ordained it with gold and like rubies and gems. They've made it all gaudy. It's a horrible sight. You have to go and see it, but you won't like it. But this is the second site that this could be the tomb of Jesus. And it's just a tomb built in to the side of a mountain, a cave, if you will. And what they do is they take this stone, and there's a little track right here, and they roll it down the track, and it will completely seal off the tomb. Now, I showed you Jesus' tomb because I think it's favorable to the one that they think that is Lazarus, but here's the one that they think is Lazarus' tomb. Now, nowadays it's kind of set into a cityscape, like there's buildings all around it and stuff, but this is the place that they think was Lazarus' tomb way back when Jesus walked the earth, and this is what it looks like inside. And I show you this because I want you to see the the effort it would have taken when Lazarus is going to now come out of the grave. I want you to have this picture in your mind. So then in verse 39, Jesus said, "Take away the stone." And Martha, the sister of the dead man, Lazarus, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead." How many days? 4 days. Matt talked about this last week. He did a great job. I'm not going to get too deep into it. But they believe, there was a Jewish belief, that for the first 3 days, the soul hung out around the body. It's like outer body experience. You get to see all the people mourning and all this stuff. And it was quite possible in Jewish belief that they would actually be able to resuscitate, not bring back from the dead, but resuscitate someone for up to 3 days. The fourth day was important because by then there was already, the odor would have already set in and the body would have been started to degrade, and it would have been very obvious that this person was dead. The soul would have left, and so after 4 days, it would have been impossible for somebody to be now brought back to life. And so Jesus says to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" And so Jesus has a lot of compassion for her. He doesn't rebuke her. He doesn't punish her. He just reminds her that he had already made a promise. And I stop there because I wonder how many of us need to be reminded that Jesus has already made a promise. And he says, if you just believe, you're going to see not your brother raised from the dead, not your your dinner table at Christmas is going to feel full again, not any of that stuff. He says, but you're going to see something greater, the glory of God. So they do as Jesus asked. They take away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father," this is interesting. He doesn't say, "Father, please raise Lazarus from the dead." He says, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." And he says, "I know that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." And so he tells Martha, "I've already made a promise." And at that point, it's already done. So he doesn't stand before God and ask, "God, please, I know you made a promise. I know you said this was going to happen, but God, please, can you just raise Lazarus from the dead?" No, he thanks him because it's already been done. And he stands there and he thanks them publicly for one purpose. And John captures this story so that you may believe. And everyone's standing around, wondering what's going on, are about to be amazed. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." Now, he cried out with a loud voice for a purpose. Jesus does everything for a purpose. Back in Isaiah 8:19, we get an idea of the ways that the magicians and the mediums and the spiritists, how they would cast their spells. This is what it says. "When they say to you, 'Consult the mediums and the spiritists who whisper and mutter,' should not people consult their God? Should they consult the dead on behalf of the living?" And so instead of whispering and muttering, now Jesus stands in front of the tomb and he cries out in a loud voice so as not to be mistaken for the magicians and the spiritists and the mediums that would use a softer voice. And so he cries out, he says, "Lazarus, come out." And the man who had died came out. His hands and his feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with the cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." I want you to picture this. It's a little funny for me. Because what you have is like Jesus doesn't say, "Lazarus, come out," and like Lazarus throws off his cloth. Like he's still wrapped tight like a mummy. And so what you have, I think, is you have Lazarus waking up. He's been recreated, right? Because his body had begun to degrade. Jesus, out of his agent of creation, he puts Lazarus back together. He clears out the odor, and Lazarus is going up the steps like this. It's a miracle he didn't die a second time, just fell over. And he comes out. And then Jesus says, unbind him and let him go. Jesus raises him from the dead. And he hops up the steps. And he comes out to new life. And the response, remember, Martha wanted this to just be them. But because other people are around, the response is incredible. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. They saw someone get raised from death 4 days after rigor mortis had already set in, after the body had began to degrade, after the odor would have knocked people off their feet. They see Jesus do something they thought was impossible. Sure, after 3 days, maybe, but not after 4. And Jesus puts his stamp right in front of them on who he is. But what we have in this passage is we have kind of two narratives playing out at the same time, because Jesus knew what he was going to do. But Mary and Martha were very much in the throngs of their grief over losing their brother. And I think the takeaway this morning, the bottom line for us, and I think if you can memorize this statement, not because, and it's not even original to me, but I think if you can memorize the truth of this statement, your life will be better. And when you go through trials, you'll go through them stronger. If you remember this statement, life is tragic, but God is faithful. Two things can be true at the same time. Our world would say, if God is faithful, then life won't be tragic. But that's not the message of the Bible. The Bible says that in this world you will have trials of many kinds. It's a promise. But in the midst of tragedy, just like Mary and Martha, they experience the faithfulness of God. Life is tragic, but God is faithful. And we need to hear this message. We need to hear it around Christmas, because a lot of us are entering Christmas with an empty place at our table, an empty place in our family where somebody once stood, a friend who passed away, somebody who's no longer around. And we need to understand that even if you're not, tragedy is right around the corner. Take you back in my life. July 2021. We all got on planes, my family, to meet up in Henderson, Nevada. My mom lives there, my brother lives there. And my sister drove in from Phoenix. My nieces drove in from Phoenix. My older brother flew in from California. We flew in from California, and my older sister flew in from Hawaii. And we were all set to do a family reunion July of 2021. Well, my older sister, as she gets off the plane from Hawaii, she starts to realize she has the sniffles. And so she calls us up. She's like, hey, just so you know, planning on still coming, but I want you to know I have the sniffles. There's something going on, a little bit of sinus pressure. And my little sister was pregnant. And she had a very important doctor's appointment the next week. And she said, you can't come. She said, I can't put this pregnancy at risk. It was during COVID, if you remember that time period. And my sister, this is my sister, my older sister. That's a s'more. It was delicious. I know what you're thinking. Yes, she really is that short. But this is my sister. Her name's Nicole. And she was distraught when she found out she couldn't come to the family reunion. But she understood. But other than Jesus, there's nothing that mattered to this woman more than her family. Nothing. She was so excited, and so she was told, you can't come. That was the last time I saw my sister. August of 2021, after she went home, she had a house in Phoenix, and she drove to Phoenix instead of getting on a plane. And a few days later, she started having trouble breathing, and she went to the hospital and was put on a ventilator, face down. She stayed in the hospital for almost a month before she passed away and went to be with Jesus. July 2021, we did not know that tragedy was right around the corner. We came together to celebrate what God was doing in our family. We came together to celebrate family. We had no clue that tragedy was right around the corner, that would be the last time any of us saw my sister. She died alone in the hospital. And I remember the days and weeks that followed. You know what I struggled with? Whether or not my feelings were okay. I'm guessing there's some men, maybe a few women in here that can relate to that. I was trying to struggle through grief and pain. I was trying to struggle through the fact that I didn't know how to show my emotions, that my whole life I've been told, when I get hit by a baseball, rub it. Run down to first base, don't show any emotion. When something bad happened, I can't cry. My grandma's funeral, I'm fighting to keep in the tears. Because for generations, man, we've been told that it's not okay to show your emotions, that you're weak if you cry. And I was fighting, trying to figure out, how do I handle my emotions in the midst of this tragedy? Are my feelings okay? One of the things that comforted me is the fact that the strongest man that ever lived experienced tragedy, and not one place does it say he tried to keep his emotions in check. Not one place does it say he was a man, so he knew he couldn't cry. No. It says, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved. He felt emotions, men. He felt what it was like to grieve in his spirit and greatly troubled. And then he wept. He wept. Jesus felt feelings and he wept openly. He walked this incredible, balance of compassion and anger. I think many of us, we go through life afraid of expressing our feelings. And as Mary and Martha grieved, Jesus also grieved with them. Which means that if you're strong enough to actually grieve, Jesus is grieving with you also. And in this passage, he puts hope on display. In the midst of tragedy, not outside of it. And this Christmas, you're going to have hope be put on display, not outside of tragedy, not outside of grief or mourning, but in the midst of it. And he's going to give you hope for both temporary healing and for eternal healing. He says, just in last week's passage, Jesus said to her, I'm the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet he shall live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? He temporarily raises Lazarus from the dead. He died again. I don't want to ruin the end of the story. Lazarus died again. He temporarily healed Lazarus. But he also eternally healed him, because although he died, he lived again. In other words, and as you enter into Christmas this year, I want you to know this. We celebrate Christmas because pain is real but temporary. Your pain is real. We don't need to write it off. If you're mourning, if you're in grief, if you're struggling, your pain is real. But no matter what, it's temporary, because even if you die, you shall live. As long as you put your faith in Jesus. But practically, we struggle. See, I remember back to whenever I tune out my wife, there's this incredible thing that happens. If I'm tuning her out, and we have incredible technology, and I think this is where it's like, all right, maybe in the 80s, I could understand tuning out your wife. Now we can pause it. Like I can pause my TV and give her my undivided attention. I don't always, I should, but I can do that. And if I take the time to pause what's in front of me and look up, I get this intimate conversation with my wife. So this Christmas, in the midst of your pain, in the midst of your suffering, I want you to remember, if you're hurting, just remember to look up. Don't get so bogged down with your pain. Although it's real, you can look up and you can experience the Jesus who's mourning right alongside of you. The Jesus who's going to provide you with comfort. The Jesus who's going to put his arm around you and walk you through, carry you through the mud at times when he needs to. And all you have to do is not fixate on the things of the world or your pain or your suffering, but to look up. And in order to do that, in preparation for the Christmas table that you're going to sit around that's inevitably going to be missing somebody from your family, right now you have to train your hearts and your minds so that our hope becomes stronger than our pain. See, pain's a strong thing. Pain colors our whole world. Pain and suffering, they dictate how our hearts are feeling, what our worldview is. The number of people who've walked away from Jesus simply because he didn't heal a family member. But if we understand the gospel, and we understand the promise that came before the raising of Lazarus, the promise that says, you will die, but you will live. And if we dwell on that this Christmas season, then our hope becomes stronger than our pain. And even though we feel it, and even though we have the freedom to mourn and grieve and cry, the greatest thing that defines us this Christmas season is not our pain, but our hope. Because a baby came into this world, fully God and fully man, so that we, although we'll die, will live again. This Christmas is your hope going to be stronger than your pain. It doesn't happen by waking up on Christmas morning. It happens by training yourself, by remembering the gospel, by reading your word and seeing who this Jesus was, who was born in a manger and died on a cross.